All right, folks, we're going to get started. How's everyone doing? I know we're towards the end of the day, so appreciate you guys being here. Hopefully we're not in the lunch coma slump. My name is Ruby Belair-Schifrin. I am the Chief Investment and Partnership Officer at Turner Labs. We're a nonprofit based out of UC Berkeley, California. We focus on housing innovation, sustainability, equity, and affordability. And so we do a myriad of things: policy change, entrepreneurship, research. And I am here joined by three wonderful panelists who I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
I'm Jack Thibault. I'm Principal of Partnerships and Growth in Partnerships at Azure Printed Homes, where I started in December. We are a modular housing manufacturer that makes homes from 3D printed recycled plastic, as well as light gauge steel. And we do everything from tiny homes, ADUs, all the way up to single family, duplexes, and multifamily.
Cool. My name is Will Yarnell. I'm a principal at Stellify Venture Capital. We're a venture capital firm that invests in mostly early stage technology in the built world. As long as it touches real estate or construction, we're interested and we'll take a look at it. And we also have a real estate arm as well that invests in mostly existing multifamily properties, both affordable and market rate. A little bit of development, but mostly existing. So yeah.
Hey everybody, my name is Qi Wang. I'm with JP Chase National Philanthropy Team, and my work specifically focused on grant making across the country to support ideas, innovations that advance housing access and affordability. And then, as you probably all know, JP Chase obviously is also a big bank, where we are one of the leading investors for multifamily housing. We provide light tech investments, construction, permanent lending. And then we do have experience lending for modular and other industrialized construction in the multifamily space. And also as a mortgage lender, we also deeply care about the supply of single family homes that are at price points affordable for low and moderate income families. And then last but not the least, I'm also happy to bring some insights from my colleagues who are studying hard at housing policies as well. And then we recently published a paper on sort of local policy solutions, local and state, to help industrialized construction work better.
Great. And so speaking of research, as someone from Turner too, just to ground us a little bit in some numbers, from the JP Chase report that she mentioned and Turner Labs studies, we find that modular can save time and cost. It's not necessarily consistent all the time and it ranges heavily, but we believe that it's between 20 and 30% in cost savings and could be even more in time savings, up to 50%. 5% of new construction, or 5% of construction is modular, so it's still a relatively small percentage of our overall housing stock. And in 2024, 8.6% of new construction starts were modular. So the opportunity for growth here is pretty tremendous. I'm curious, as you guys, this is a question for each of you, but as you think about industrialized construction, kind of what is your viewpoint or lens on that? And what do you think is a core challenge today? And Shi, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And then I think for us, first and foremost, as a company, we're really deeply invested in trying to solve the problem of housing affordability. And then housing supply repeatedly have been cited as the bottleneck for a lot of the issues. And then we approach housing supply in different angles. And we know like industrialized construction is not necessarily a silver bullet that will solve all the problem, but we do see it as a very important part of the toolkit that can really drive down the cost of production. And then, as I mentioned, sort of on the business side, we have, I believe, at least financed 30, if not more, big rental housing projects that use construction innovation. And then we have developed experience and some expertise there shared by my colleagues on the business side. And then on the philanthropy side, we're trying to think through philanthropy as a source of capital that's incredibly flexible, but is also limited. How can we use this special capital source resource to support the industry. And we have done things from piloting to support developers to sort of start to adopt industrialized construction methods, all the way to sort of how do we build a field better? How can we sort of inform policy solutions? How can we build capacity, manufacturing capacity, as well as sort of incentivize some sort of collaborations, either within states or regionally, to help with aggregated demands and such. And then on the policy side, we have a team called JP Morgan Chase Policy Center. That's the report. That's the team who generated the report. So they are constantly looking at policies being implemented or proposed in different parts of the country. You will probably see like this little bookmark either in your goodie bag or at the registration desk if you are interested in policy. Definitely encourage you to give it a read and let us know what you think, if the policies being referenced there are actually working, what's not. That's another angle we are trying to drive social change is through making policies better.
Yeah, our lens is primarily as a venture capital investor. We look at companies in the space. It sort of runs the gamut. We look at companies that are actually fabricating modular and prefab products, software companies that are somewhere in sort of the enablement of either the manufacturing or delivery, or the sales process to other players in the ecosystem, whether that's a developer, lender, or whatever it may be. And then we also, from the real estate perspective, like I said, we don't do a ton of development, but we've been involved in some, and just generally being in the real estate industry, you can pretty quickly understand, what perspective is valuable to bring to companies that you are investing in or working with in the space. I think one of the biggest things that's sort of holding back innovation here is understanding what the interests are of each of the players, especially for early stage companies. That can be difficult to figure out. And so that's a perspective that we try to bring to companies that we work with or are talking to in this space.
And then, our lens as Azure, I mentioned, we're a modular manufacturer. A lot of what we do is partnerships with local government, and so it's kind of trying to do everything from like RFP processes to kind of getting down to the nitty gritty on delivering those projects. We do a lot of transitional housing, but we're also doing like luxury single family rebuilds in the Altadena and Pasadena fires. I think half the reason I was asked to be on this panel is also my previous experience where I designed and implemented Colorado's Innovative Housing Incentive Program, which was a $40 million grant and loan program to support modular, panelized, and other innovative housing manufacturing methods. I'll get more into some of the details around that, but we also paired that with some regulatory reform and some kind of demand side, like project set-asides for modular and offsite. I'd say the challenge that I'm kind of trying to figure out both in my former state role and in my current role is that of diversification. I think that the industry in general and what we saw in Colorado, part of the inspiration for the program that I managed was that we saw the industry collapse after the great financial crisis, and we want to think, okay, how can we build this back in a way that sustains, future recessions? So we thought about it through how do we actually diversify this already relatively small pool of money we had across multiple building types. So it was, the company I now work for was a recipient. So 3D printing, we put some grant and loan funds into panelized, light gauge steel, wood, bigger factories, smaller factories, and then also different project types. So ADU, single family, multifamily. And then same at Azure, it's, we don't want to be too at the whims of the market in terms of just, single family, duplexes, multifamily. So we do a lot of backyard studios, ADUs, tiny homes on wheels, or as new like mining projects come along, we're doing temporary workforce housing for those. For exploring outdoor hospitality, and our tiny homes on wheels end up going out to a lot of those projects. So through that, we're kind of able to have a diversified pipeline and hopefully not go belly up like we've seen some other actors in the industry do.
Great. So, Will, let's start with you on what makes industrialized construction investable right now. Like when you're looking at early stage companies, what do you look for? What are some milestones? What gets you excited?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just the fact that it's a massive market, the housing market. So there's, that's attractive. As a venture investor, you're always looking at the market size. And it's also just a pressing issue, affordability, housing supply. These things are in the news all the time. And so it's on everyone's mind, not just for Stellify, who's focused on this space, but I think a lot of other investors out there. So that's what makes it attractive at sort of a high level. In terms of what we look for, at the early stage of any startup, revenue is kind of everything. And so that's obviously something we're looking at. And it's particularly difficult in this space because you may have LOIs and a big pipeline, but I think we all know that it doesn't really mean much until the project starts or delivers. Projects can get pushed out, they can get canceled altogether. So that's something that we kind of have to look at closely, not just what the pipeline looks like, but the quality of the projects in that pipeline and likelihood that they convert and all those kinds of things. And I'd say alongside that, you talked about diversification. I think that's a really good point and something that we look for. There's a little bit of tension there because at the early stage, you want to be hyper-focused on finding repeatability in one thing you can do really well. But at the same time, you can't just wait for those projects to convert and deliver. So I think there's some other things there. We've seen companies do interesting things like just finding ways to get paid outside of the normal draw schedule, whether that's like an upfront fee or design fees or things like that. So finding something that's sort of innovative, but also fits into the existing model, because that's key in finding adoption in this industry. You can't reinvent it as a single early stage company, but you can sometimes find a wedge in where you're able to get the revenue that you need to while not causing too much friction in that sale process.
Yeah, that's a really interesting tension too that you bring up around a desire to diversify, but also the appeal of specialization, right, and getting something right. I'm curious, building on that, Jack, and then Will, I would like your thoughts on this too, but it gets into how you evaluate risk. And there's risk at the company level, and then there's risk at the project level. And so, Jack, I'm curious, putting on your government hat, how you guys thought about that risk, and then Will, from a VC kind of mentality, how you guys think about that risk.
At the government level, I think I kind of started to touch on it already with just like trying not to put all of our eggs in one basket. We didn't want to be in a position of like having the new Solyndra. I know that's like dated now, but it's, for anyone who's worked in government, it comes up a lot still. And basically, putting, a bunch of bureaucrats putting money into a tech company that they don't understand, and then at least this is the perception, then the company goes belly up. So we definitely didn't want to be in that position. I mentioned that we kind of spread the money across several different kind of types of building systems and project types. The other kind of mitigation factor we took was we brought in a bunch of experts. We paid consultants to help us review all of the applications to build new factories. People who knew like how to set up a factory, how to operate one, where there was BS that we were glossing over. And that really helped us kind of suss out who was serious, who had a good proposal. And yeah, ultimately all of the companies we funded are still operating at least a few years later. So far, no cylinders.
Yeah, as far as risk, I mean, no matter what kind of investor you are, it's sort of all about managing risk and understanding your own risk appetite. And so I think kind of at the highest level, like not just Stellify and how we think about risk, but other venture investors think about it differently. And, they underwrite that risk in the investments in different ways. And one example is just trying to give companies as much money as they possibly can and just kind of hope that they get the revenue. That's not the way that we like to operate, but it's happened with a lot of companies in the space and others as well. So that's one thing to consider for any early stage companies in the space, is just finding alignment with your capital partners. And I think that's pretty important, because patient capital is better than sort of the traditional, grow at all costs type of capital that a lot of venture investors kind of bring to their process. So that's one thing that I think about as far as risk. And then kind of a level below that, again, it comes back to revenue and quality of revenue. And so we look for companies that can somehow de-risk the sales process, reduce the friction, whether that's some sort of software layer that makes it easier for developers to say yes when they're sort of looking at a new project. That's one thing. And then, if you're a company that's actually fabricating these products, that's a whole nother level of risk. You have to think about your factories and your capex and properties and buildings. And again, a lot of capital partners aren't going to be comfortable with that. They just want to invest in B2B SaaS. So there's different levels even within the sort of venture ecosystem. And then at the project level, the thing that we think most about is sort of alignment, the revenue model aligning with all the different players that are involved in a project, from the financing to the developer to insurance, kind of across the board. Each of those different players represents a different risk. Another party that could say, no, this isn't going to be a fit for the project. And so aligning your revenue model and the product itself with how that ecosystem operates, while still trying to be innovative, is sort of key and something we think a lot about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the couple points just to repeat back that you were saying is around kind of the VC model of throwing a lot of money at a company so it can gobble that to absorb and grow doesn't necessarily work for this industry. I mean, Katerra took about $2 billion in venture funding, and so that sets you up where you have to be worth like
you have to keep
4.
growing.
Yeah, exactly. In order to make that. I mean, that is setting you up for failure through how you've raised your capital. The other thing I think that you pointed out is this constellation of factors that need to align for things to work, right, from a risk management perspective. And so, Chi, I'm wondering, if you can kind of speak a little bit to the role of philanthropy in that, and like, how do you think, what are effective ways to de-risk this market so that it can scale and kind of be more investable?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. In our philanthropy work, especially as a philanthropy team that sits under a big bank, we are constantly thinking about like, what is our theory of change based on where we are? So our current theory to really help scale sort of social impact solution is we want to be catalytic. And we want to support nonprofit organizations to do work that could eventually lead to market-based solutions and policy-based solutions, because we know philanthropy cannot just be used as a gap financing tool. We want to get to a place where we are helping to build some solutions that can be self-sustainable, so we don't get into a situation where this product can only be affordable to low-income families when someone is out there filling every gap for sort of every project being developed. So one way we're thinking there is And by the way, like I'm very much a student in the space. As a philanthropy provider, like we don't necessarily have the level of expertise you all have in this room. So we very much welcome all and any opinions about what will help the industry works better. Like what are the specific hurdles that we can use philanthropy money for as a flexible source of capital to get over those hurdles, to kick the flywheel, to start turning. Some ideas we have heard obviously today and yesterday was like the value of standardization. Like there's a need perhaps for that conveyor, for that connective tissue, or some sort of platform to sort of bring the open source ideas to life. We also have heard from different parts of the country, public sector's interest in sort of leaning in more to housing supply using construction innovation as a tool. And we have also heard sort of like the problems with fragmentation. We know manufacturing will benefit from sort of repeatability. But if a manufacturer needs to always be adapting their processes, their design based on very restrictive sort of land, permitting, building codes, that all adds to the cost. So if there are efforts that are trying to sort of align either at a state level or even regional level, like some of the building codes, permitting regimes, that can help facilitate the process, streamline the process, that's another angle we're also thinking through.
Great. I'm curious too for all of you guys, what feels different now? There was this, we've seen booms and busts in this industry, both from like kind of a prop tech VC angle, from factories that have gone up and down, right? Government intervention. I mean, even going way back to, HUD's project. What was that called again? Thank you, Operation Breakthrough. That's why we have some insiders in the room. What do you think that we're in a more ripe moment for this, and if so, why? If it's interesting to take off.
Yeah, happy to start. One thing that feels different, just looking at the history and thinking about what we see today, is different business models and different technology. And as far as business models, we see like micro factories, a few of those companies popping up that didn't exist, at least in the same way before, which solves some pretty important logistics problems. And some of the financing concerns, they partner with the developer. It's not so much like a arm's length transaction where it's just a vendor. There's partnership there, which leads to alignment of interests. So I think that's really interesting. And then there's a few things around sort of creating the operating system or like enablement layer for this technology, which is sort of key to reduce that friction that I keep coming back to. One of those ways is, companies like Juno, which was sort of reborn as, a company that can sort of help developers navigate these processes and find those vendors, not just software first, but some services as well. I think that approach is really interesting and, maybe not the fastest way to scale because there's services involved. It's not just software, but nonetheless, I think it's a good approach. And then there are companies that are just doing it with software, doing a similar thing, trying to build, marketplaces or sort of other software point solutions within their broader system that can help with design processes, taking it from architectural drawings to shop drawings to send to the factory, things like that just reduce some of the back and forth, reduce some of the complexity. I think those are some of the key problems and some of the new things that we're seeing in the space.
I'll add to kind of expand on what you said about smaller factories and kind of taking a more incremental approach. I think that, everything, as you alluded to before, everything that is kind of going on in the industry now is in the wake of what happened with Katerra. So I think that's kind of like the starting point of the current phase we're in. And I think that we have a 25,000 square foot factory, which is ever so slightly bigger than our original factory in LA. So we have two And when we eventually expand across the country, we plan to have one in each time zone. It will be 4 probably 25,000 square foot factories. That's about the same as one big mega factory, but it's, as you said, it's spread across the country. It's more, so we can kind of endure the fluctuations in any given geography. We're also doing smaller projects to fill up our pipeline. Smaller kind of tricky urban infill projects that are don't necessarily fit with a kind of a bigger box off the shelf that other manufacturers would do. We can do that and kind of build our pipeline more incrementally, and then if something drops off, we can quickly backfill it with another small project. So I think it's not necessarily like explosive headline grabbing growth of yesteryear that is different. I think it's more this kind of like piecemeal and incremental growth that is more sustainable in the long term. And I'll just add again, from the industry or from the government perspective, we support a lot of panelized factories, and I think that's another kind of it's like going back to the point of incrementalism. That is a great on-ramp for, if you're in a state where there was, at that point, only 1% of projects were built using modular when we created the program. I think Panelize is a great way to kind of slowly get folks who are fearful of like doing an entirely different, permitting process going through the state instead of local, to start with Panelized. I think that helps a lot too.
Mm-hmm. Chi, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think what makes me really excited about the current moment is I think there's a lot of political will, both at the federal level and state and local level, on housing supply, and there's really growing attention, I feel like, from the public sector on using construction innovation. I think that's one, and then I'd be really curious to see what are the different ways public sector can play an effective role, either by providing incentives or changing policies to help the industry. And then the other thing is I have just been really jazzed by the conversations we have been having on standardization. That really makes me feel like we have so many excellent players now. Like, we have less of a work to do, not saying zero work to do, about convincing why construction innovation is a good idea. Like, we already start to think about what are the solutions that can lift up the entire industry. And then I think like standardization, replicability not only helps us cost saving, like for individual manufacturers, developers, but also helps with financing access too. That's how you can get financing providers to feel more comfortable when sort of different manufacturers can be producing products in a standardized, similar fashion. Then the underwriting of a development project will be less about underwriting specific individual manufacturers, but also we have the confidence of if something goes wrong with one manufacturing facility, there's a standardized way that other people can pick it up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think just to really kind of hone in on some of the things you guys are saying, we kind of need a mountain of failures before we get some breakthroughs too. And so there's been enough, I think, folks in this space that have been tinkering to figure it out that, like, this feels like now the wave where we figure it out and get to scale. So I'm curious, I have one more question, then I wanted to leave a lot of time for Q&A from the audience. So we'll take some questions from folks here. But what's one thing that you could, if you could change or introduce, that you think is missing that would have an outsized impact on this industry? And Chi, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about sort of regional coordination, and Jeff, we have here and really helped me think through that a lot. What are the different places where governments can sort of work together, align on some of the key issues like inspection, if a home is manufactured in one jurisdiction when it's sited in another, are there efficiencies there to have some sort of agreement where it doesn't need to be inspected twice. And then building codes is another for areas with similar needs, climate-wise, risk-wise. Are there sort of more aligned building codes we can develop with sort of the information from manufacturers on what's feasible, what really helps drive down costs, so we don't need to be sort of custom make products just to expand to a different market?
It's tough to pick one thing, but I think the thing that comes to mind is around financing, mostly at the project level, but there's probably some other versions of that too. So we have one investment in a company that's sort of in the IC space called Dextal, which makes prefab facade panels for mid to high-rise construction. They've done really well, have a really good pipeline, started to build out this manufacturer ecosystem. Everything looks really good. But there's still like cash constraints because they can't get paid as quickly as they need to. Like the traditional draw schedules and sort of the lender relationship doesn't work in their favor. And so from that experience, that's why my mind kind of goes to financing. And I know we're starting to see some more creative financing solutions at the project level. I think also at sort of the factory level. So there are things out there that I think will become more prevalent and will help more companies sort of flourish if they can get the other parts of the business right. But yeah, if I could sort of flip a switch, I'd love to see sort of a debt product for construction projects that was neatly aligned with the incentives of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty much my answer. So, and I'll just to add on to that, and then I'll come up with something else original. Actually, not original. I totally agree. I think that there are plenty of lenders out there who are comfortable with the modular lending structure. They're just harder to find than they should be. And that then I think makes it harder than it should be for developers who are getting started in this and want to do I was talking to someone who wanted to do a duplex in Detroit, and he was like, who do I talk to? Everyone I call doesn't want to do it. And it turns out like there are lenders in Michigan, there are lenders across the country who are willing to work with you on this. And it's for whatever reason, I think the visibility and the like conservative approach to risk that applies more broadly is what people run up against. So I think some way to make that more obvious would help a lot. And then I really love the theme that I think has rippled throughout this whole conference of collusion or collaboration. I really appreciate that and would love to see more of that. We saw some of it in my role at the state, where the various manufacturers that we funded kind of came together to think about demand aggregation and how they could all partner together to basically, when there was a gap in their pipeline and their factory was slowing down, can they build a standardized unit effectively at cost to be able to keep the factory humming? And they kind of all agreed, like, yeah, we can do roughly this same project type and each contribute kind of, again, incrementally to building it out. But I think that's one small specific example, but I really I was inspired by what we heard from our friends in Ireland, and I think if we can, I think that creativity comes from having like a set of constraints that is known and consistent, and I totally agree that if we can kind of agree on some basic parameters that developers and government partners can work with, that will actually allow us to kind of flourish creatively as well.
Great. Yeah, I think this point on improving the lending helps build a more robust, real pipeline, which then can unlock more investor dollars to help grow your company, and then kind of feeding back into getting to that scale. And so there is this connecting the dots on all of these pieces to make our capital flows work better for this industry, which is kind of this new alignment. And the international models are good. I know some people are like, oh, but that's Sweden, like, whatever. But I do think it's good to see what's possible and to prove to ourselves that some of this is problems of our own making versus things that are wrong with like the technology or the industry. It feels like we've kind of figured out how to do it. It's just more of the procedural stuff now, right? Of getting all the ducks in a row. So this is a good question, though. It's about what is the storytelling and narrative change that's happening out there? And JP Morgan Chase as an engine of that could be really transformative.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And that's a great point. It's something we're thinking about too. Like, how can we better tell the stories of innovation using our own voice or by supporting like researchers or major conveners that have that reputation to be able to tell the story in a very compelling way. Like, we're not doing like just fun, cute projects. We're not innovating for the sake of doing it because it has never been done before. This is a real solution. This is a real industry. I think storytelling very much is a big piece of it. We'd be happy to do it on our own, or like sort of talking about the investments we made, or sort of through supporting nonprofits or other organizations to do that work. And I think the other piece is also, I think the market or developers who are not yet comfortable with the solution, or why investors are not entirely comfortable with the solution, is sort of the lack of perhaps data still in a way. Do we have a way to really like look deeply into the cost saving, the timeline, the risk, in a way that people have confidence in, not just like individual projects sort of self-report, but a more rigorous database? I think that's also another way we can really help the industry.
Yeah, and this is a good point to bring up in front of someone like Chi, who's leading philanthropy, who can fund things like narrative change type work. And I'll just say too that the workforce shortage that you had mentioned too is a huge driver here. Reports are between 350 and 450,000 construction workers that we need that we don't have to meet current demand, which is roughly $10 billion of lost economic output. So there's a real dollars and cents story behind this. Statements, comments?
I'll add a quick point.
Yeah, go for it.
I think another thing on the narrative front is, and this has also come up throughout the conference, is this idea of like, you don't want it to know you don't want people to know it's modular. Like you walk through the project and you don't want to know the difference. And I get that from the perspective of like, you don't want it to feel like it's narrow. You don't want it to be obvious where it was stitched together. But at the same time, I feel like it's like creates a little shame around the industry. And it's like this carryover from manufactured housing. So what I would love to see as part of that narrative is like, let's be proudly like, yes, this was built in a factory. And, I wasn't there for the Icon tour yesterday, but I think that one thing that they do well is they're proudly 3D printed, and they're not trying to say, you can't tell it's 3D printed. They're like, no, look, we're round. You've never seen anything round before. And we're, to some extent, we do a different form of 3D printing. We do it in the factory, and but same deal. We're like, we don't hide that, and we are proud of it, and we make sure that when our projects, our publicly funded projects go out, that they brag about it being offsite built and 3D printed, and how it is unique. So I think that kind of needs to be part of it, is the like less shame and more pride in the storytelling.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have the answer, but what could be different is what's possible with software now. And I think everything that you just described needs to be pieced together in a way that the developer doesn't have to do any extra work. And I think that's completely possible, and it exists in pretty much any other complex product that we produce that comes, parts come from all over the world, and there's some sort of either company or set of companies that are taking on that coordination cost, and they're incentivized to do it because they can make money, and then the consumer doesn't have to think about where the parts are coming from. And I think that's completely possible here, but it's such a big industry, and we still are in the like cold start problem. Like don't have enough momentum, not enough capital, and it's a massive problem. But I think that what could be different is, again, what's possible with software to kind of piece those things together.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I want to hear your perspective from Irontown. I think for us, we because we are whether we're using like steel based structures or the 3D printed, we're doing the framing. It's entirely or mostly automated, and therefore we can do weird shapes and we can customize a lot more. So I definitely agree with the software and automation being different this time around. But
Yeah, it's
what do you
adding more
got?
enablement. Hold on one second.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. But I just want to parse your questions out a little bit, because productization, as a former developer, I'll tell you, I don't care what you call it, but if you're going to deliver cheaper and faster and more reliably, great. But the more reliably is one of the key things here, right? Like, what's your track record? How many times have you done this? And that sometimes has been missing from the equation. The separate question of why was it so high and go down from a research perspective, there's a lot more in that has more to do with policy decisions and, frankly, racism and NIMBYism and anti-poverty. People just don't want to live near poor people type of a thing. That is more politics than this is a product that we do or do not like. Yeah. I heard from another factory owner too, just about being honest about when it's the right project for your product, right? This is not a silver bullet. We're not trying to get 100% factory built housing here. But I think when you are desperate for pipeline, you say yes to whatever you can get, and that can put you in a tricky situation. I think what they're saying is the technology is enabled for more flexibility on sites today, especially doing microfactories, than traditional modular. All right, well, just thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you so much for the discussion.